Hey everybody, I'm Nate from HuggingFace, and today we have a conversation between myself and Xander Steenbrugge. Xander is an independent AI researcher, digital artist, public speaker, online educator, and founder of the wzrd.ai digital media platform. You might know him from his fantastic YouTube channel, Archive Insights, where he covers and breaks down various papers and topics in the machine learning landscape. In this chat, we'll go over how he got into machine learning, what his educational journey was like, and where he sees the field of generative machine learning going. This talk is actually part of the Hug Sprint, where community members are training and sharing generative models. So if you're interested and you're watching this before April 14th, 2022, you can find more information about joining in the description. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you there. Without further ado, here's Xander.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you for joining me. I think people are really excited to hear from you, especially around generative models. You know, we have this Hug Sprint going on right now, which is all about training generative models and a lot of really cool, interesting things. And I know that you were pretty interested in these things. So, but first off, I think one thing I always like to ask people that are in the field of machine learning is, how did you end up in the field of machine learning?
Yeah, so I mean, I studied engineering here in the University of Ghent in Belgium, and like my engineering degree was actually in like electronics. But you know, during my master's, I kind of realized, hey, electronics is not really my thing. It's also like kind of slow. It takes a long time to develop a chip. And so through my thesis, I kind of went into this like area of like brain-computer interfaces, where people are using these EEG headsets. You get like these brain waves, and you're using machine learning basically to figure out what the brain is doing. And, you know, this was like the first time that I was doing ML, and I was like really impressed by the fact that these machine learning models, they can make sense of data that as a human, when you look at it, it's just like total noise, like you don't see any patterns in there. And, you know, we were able to build like really impressive tools with that. And this like made me really want to pursue that career. And then I don't think I've ever looked back since. You know, I've been doing machine learning ever since.
So can you talk a little bit more about that journey and how you learned more about machine learning? Because when I looked online, sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
So like, I think when I graduated, you know, machine learning was not really as big or as popular as it is now. Like, you know, I graduated in 2014. So this was like 2 years after, you know, AlexNet famously had this like neural network breakthrough on ImageNet. And so it was still like the very early days of deep learning. Like, I remember during my thesis, you know, we were mostly using like these traditional old school machine learning methods, like, you know, LDA and SVMs and all these like kernel methods. And like neural networks was like, you know, there was like the new kid on the block, but like not too many people were actually doing neural networks. And so I started my first job as like a data scientist, and my thesis was done in MATLAB. And they told me, hey, actually, you know, in the professional domain, we usually use Python. So you should go ahead and learn some Python. Like the first thing I did, you know, the first 2 weeks on my job, I was basically learning how to do Python. And then, you know, I started doing a bunch of projects. And I'm really grateful for being like a consultant for 2 years, because it exposes you to very different areas. But I soon realized that I was actually really interested in like the technical side of things. And so I actually, you know, all of my commutes, I would spend like all my time on the train basically reading machine learning papers. And so I was basically trying to catch up all this missing information that I didn't get from my education. So I think I learned most of it by myself, really. And I think the main driver for me has always been like curiosity. Like I never felt forced to learn anything because someone told me that I should do this or that. I always had this like intrinsic motivation, like, oh, these methods, they look really interesting and I want to learn what's going on. And so a lot of it is like, you know, self-driven.
Right. That's awesome. You know, I actually had a similar experience myself too. And when I was taking courses, I was a business major. During class, I would just be studying Python. You know, I'd be sitting there in the back of my computer studying as well. And trying to fill in those gaps. You know, trying to find the things that are going to add value in the future or something, you know, and I think you get kind of obsessed, right?
Yeah. And I feel like, you know, if you have this like personal intrinsic motivation to learn about a field, it's just a much better driver than when some professor tells you that you should learn this syllabus or this. I mean, I've always felt like I wanted to be doing this. It's not like, I was forced to do this or it's my job. It's always been like, I really want to know how this works. And this kind of leads you to the fact that, I'm reading about this stuff like all the time. Like when I go to the bathroom, I'll take out my phone, I'll browse through Twitter. There will be a bunch of paper links and I'll just start reading them because I really want to know what's going on. And so I feel like that's really what people should be looking for, is like which field or which subfield really drives me in terms of curiosity and intrinsic motivation.
Right. And I think when people, it can take your whole lifetime to sometimes find a passion like that. But once you do find something like that, it unlocks education for you, I think, right? Like, because then education isn't like this chore. It's like this passion.
And I also feel like, like everyone who's good at machine learning that I know is continuously learning. Like this field is moving so quickly that you can't really say that you're done learning. Like this is a perpetual thing, right?
Right. Exactly. It's a lifelong thing. Every single day, learn a little bit more. Right.
Yeah.
Now, what I also noticed online is that it seems that you went down a path of teaching yourself using platforms like Coursera. Can you talk about maybe some tips for folks who are venturing into their own self-learning journeys?
Yeah, this is a question that I get asked pretty often, like, hey, which courses did you do? And to be honest, like I only took one machine learning course, which I think was the one by Jeff Dean on Coursera on deep learning. But this was like a while ago. Like this is probably like 4 years ago that I took that course. And so to be honest, I don't actually know what the best resources are right now for somebody who's entering the field for the first time. Because when I learned about it, this was like 4 or 5 years ago. So probably the resources have changed. And since then, my main resource of basically keeping track of everything is Twitter. I think Twitter is a really great space because a lot of researchers are sort of sharing their ideas and there's like open discussions going on. But I think Reddit might be just as good. It's just that, you basically, the thing I always tell people is that you should try to figure out a way to create your own filter bubble. Like you have to shape this bubble so that you get the news that you want to get, and you have to. And this takes a little bit of time. Like on Twitter, if you start making a new account, like the first month, Twitter won't be very useful to you.
Right.
But if you give it some time and you start shaping this bubble and you follow the right people, after a while, it actually becomes a very valuable resource. So,
right. I stayed away from Twitter for years, and then I finally created one. Well, I finally started using mine this past summer, and now it's really starting to become very valuable. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah. I had the same thing. Like I had a Twitter account, and I didn't use it for like 3 years, and then a friend told me, "Hey, you should really use Twitter. Like it's really good." And I tried it again, and like I had some good pointers of people to follow, and then after a while, it starts picking up. So it's kind of like a slow resource, but once you have that filter bubble tuned, it's actually super valuable.
Yeah. What is it about machine learning where everybody in the machine learning world is just on Twitter and just posting all this, really awesome content?
Yeah, I don't really know why. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think the field is just moving so quickly that all the other forms of communication, like email threads or blog posts, are always slightly lagging the state of the art because it's just going so quickly. And Twitter feels like a really good medium to do like very quick, flashy news updates. And then you get all this, these little posts, and then the things that you're really interested in, you click through and you actually read into them deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of things are you working on right now?
So I'm doing quite a few things. So like my main job right now is that I work for a biotech startup in Boston. And so we're actually using de novo protein design using tools like AlphaFold, for example, right? So there's this big breakthrough in the biology field with AlphaFold. And so it's like the first time when proteins, which are basically the molecular engines in your body that do everything that make you alive, we're starting to understand like their structures and how they actually perform their function. And it's the first time in biology that people have really started to open up this box and we can start making things in a totally new way. Kind of an interesting area to work in. But then at the same time, like in my spare time, I've been, for the past 3 years, I've been really passionate about digital art and generative media. And so I'm also really following the whole space around like, text to image with like Clip and VQGAN, and now diffusion models, and obviously DALL-E. But it feels like, this space is just, it's moving so quickly. It's insane. Like almost every other week, there's this new like breakthrough state-of-the-art model that
Right.
suddenly, like you have this reading list of papers that you still want to check out, and maybe there's some code that you want to try and run. But it feels like before you can get to that list, there's always like another approach that sort of like overtakes all the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
So this field is just insane. Like the speed of innovation here is incredible.
Right. But then at the same time, too, if you don't get to that backlog of papers, you don't understand how the next ones came about, too, which is like.
Yes. Yeah. It is a struggle. It is a struggle.
Yeah. So like, research around, research in general, but research around generative models is changing, rapidly week by week, and sometimes even day by day. So I think a lot of folks in our field sort of get fatigued trying to keep up with all that, the latest and greatest research. So how do you try to manage that? Is there a method to your madness on managing this issue, or do you have any tips here?
I honestly don't, because I'm kind of almost drowning myself also. Like I feel like there's this like trade-off between learning and like understanding new techniques and sort of keeping up with the progress in the fundamental research domain versus like actually doing stuff and experimenting and producing content, right? There's this like trade-off. And I feel like it's a very tricky balance, because on the one hand, you want to keep on top of like the newest tools and you want to understand how they work so you can actually use them and build something cool. But on the other hand, it also feels like if you're constantly hopping to the newest paper and the newest repo, then you never really get to dive in and build something that's interesting and actually make something. So I feel like this trade-off is very tricky. Like I noticed this, for example, when I was, in like a couple of months ago, I basically started working on my own like VQGAN plus Clip pipeline. Mm-hmm. And so I took a lot of these notebooks that were in the open source domain. There's a lot of different people that were, posting notebooks. And so I took ideas from all these notebooks and I started building my own code base. And I really spent like a couple of months, and I was pretty happy about that. And, I used it for a couple of different projects. Like I did some NFTs, I did some video clips for producers. And now I'm at this point where like this code base is actually really good, but the techniques that I'm using in there are kind of like already outdated. Like they're 6 months old, but they're kind of outdated already. So the question is like, what do you do with all that work? Like now you have a really good, nice code base, but maybe the models in there are not that state of the art anymore. And so this very weird sense that like all the work that you've put into it is maybe not really useful anymore. And so, yeah.
It's kind of like this trade-off between, like you said, if you don't get your hands on the keyboard and really learn it, you're not going to have a really intuitive understanding of how the technology works. But at the same time, then if you do dive in, you're not using the state of the art. But I think it's really important to do that deep dive and get your hands on the keyboard and really do the work, because I think that's when you're really learning. Because anybody can jump to the next repo and run the example script, but being able to put your own twist on things and really take a couple months to dive deep.
Although if I have to be really honest, I also feel like we're entering this kind of like paradigm shift where it used to be the case in the past like 5 or 6 years that if you wanted to use machine learning and create something valuable with AI, you had to be like a technical person, like a programmer. You had to know how these things work, how to clone a GitHub repo, maybe tweak some of the code and make your own framework. But it feels like more and more the people that can leverage machine learning will not have to be technically schooled. Like it feels like, like in this whole space of like clip art, for example, there's people that are really good, what are called prompt engineers. They're really good at figuring out which sentences produce really interesting visual content. Mm-hmm. And those people often are the artists that are making the best clip art. And they might not necessarily understand like all the technical details that are happening in that code base. But nonetheless, they're able to leverage these tools via Colab notebooks and whatnot to create really interesting visual content. So I feel like gradually we're moving to this space where AI is becoming so adopted by a large mainstream audience that the tools actually become easy to use for anyone, regardless of technical knowledge. And that's a very interesting transition, I think.
Right, and I think we've been seeing this quite a bit at HuggingFace with spaces. With people creating demo apps where anybody can use them. You could send them to your grandma, and your grandma could be a prompt engineer, right? And then all of a sudden, machine learning is in the hands of everybody. So I think you're right. This paradigm shift in the field is, I think it's for the best, right? Because then you're getting the most diverse group of people to be able to use your models and things like that.
There is, however, like another thing which is kind of tricky, and I'm actually happy that you guys are directly sort of like addressing this. But like one of the things that you start seeing is that a lot of these state-of-the-art machine learning models are built by like these really large research organizations, OpenAI or DeepMind. And it's becoming harder and harder to run these models on like consumer hardware. Like if you have even if you buy the best consumer graphics card that you can get from NVIDIA, which is the one that I have, like the RTX 3090, you can't even run GPT-3 or any of these super fancy image generation models. Like you just can't. And I feel like this is a little bit tricky. It's a little bit of a dangerous slope because, at some point you could get to this state of the world where only these large, big tech companies are able to wield these very powerful AI tools. And so I feel like a lot more effort should be put in like distributing these systems where maybe you have a pool of nodes of people that have a single GPU and they all contribute to this entire server to basically run large state-of-the-art models in like a distributed, decentralized way. And I think that's a very interesting area to keep developing, because otherwise, these large companies are going to have monopolies on some of the most important technology in the world. So that's kind of like a tricky.
Right. I think it's really important to, sort of crowdsource the hardware so that, we can make this stuff more accessible to everybody. I think that's really what like you said, otherwise, corporations are going to be the only ones who can run these models, which is kind of disheartening. Yeah. So I noticed, we talked about how you're interested in these generative AI models. Can you talk a little bit about where you see this field going, this field of being able to extend the capabilities of human creativity?
Yeah. So I used the term on Twitter before. Like I really look at these generative models as like, like you could sort of look at them as like they're creating digital content. But the way that I really see them is like, I like the term like imagination amplifiers. They're like, you still need a human to give it some input. Like, what is the thing that you want the machine learning model to create for you? Like a prompt, for example. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like what's going to happen in the future is that there's going to be a lot of very creative people that are going to leverage all these generative models to create very interesting digital content. And so like right now, it's mostly text to image, right? But this is going to change. Like it's going to be video, it's going to be music, and soon it's going to be like totally immersive 3D environments that you can just like put on a VR headset and just walk around in. And so like these are really like the kinds of building blocks that people talk about when they're talking about things like the metaverse, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Like we all know that increasingly we're spending a fraction of our lives in this digital world, consuming and producing digital content. And so I really feel like these generative models are just an extension of the digital tools we already have. It's just that they take away a lot of the technical skill that's usually required in making digital content. Like you could have people using Photoshop or like different kinds of video editing software, or maybe things like Unity or Blender that create 3D worlds. And I feel like all of those tools are going to get consolidated by these really powerful machine learning models that can just be driven by language. Like you just have to have the creativity of imagining a certain type of digital content or a world, and then you describe that to a machine learning system, and it will actually produce the pixels for you. And so I feel like, this is, I totally understand that a lot of people feel kind of threatened by this paradigm, because, we're talking about a lot of jobs here. But to be honest, I think you can kind of like compare this with, when the entire agricultural industry got replaced by tractors, right? Nobody works as a farmer anymore because we have tractors doing all the hard work. So like all these jobs they're going to become like the technical part is going to become easy and automated. But I still feel like the really important part is like, what's the narrative that these digital tools are building? And I feel like humans are still going to be driving the narratives. We're still going to have creative people that have a sense of what kinds of digital content they want to make and what story they want to bring. But I do feel like this is really going to change the way that we interact with digital content.
Exactly. I think, I don't think human creativity is ever going to go away. I don't think anybody's ever going to see an AI model and say, oh, well, I don't need to create now. I think it's the human experience to want to create art in general, right? So, whether that's music or digital media, et cetera. And, I think, just like Photoshop changed the game, some of these these tools are going to change the same way.
To be honest, I also think that we might soon see the emergence of like autonomous AI systems that produce really interesting content. Like, there's been a lot of experiments with like autonomous digital artists. Like I'm working with I don't know if you know Gene Kogan. He has this really interesting project called Abraham. And so I'm kind of working on Abraham a little bit. And so there's this idea that in the near future, we will have this autonomous AI systems that produce very interesting digital content, like digital art, or maybe even stories that they write. And so I feel like right now what we're consuming is purely content created by people. And I think that line is going to blend slowly, and there might be very interesting content coming from AI systems. And I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I mean, as I think the more content there is to choose from, the more interesting content you can find. And I feel that's just enriching to the human experience.
What sort of content are you thinking?
I mean, I'm pretty sure that in the not too distant future, we'll have like short stories being purely written by AI models that are like, that could be very interesting. Maybe something like a movie is a little bit further down the line because that's even more complicated. But yeah, I can definitely see AI starting to create short narratives. And I feel like this whole revolution we've seen in like pixels, like image generation, we're soon going to see something similar in the audio domain, where there's going to be very interesting types of music. Like if you think about the entire field of electronic music that was purely enabled by computers, like digital synthesizers and computers, and we could suddenly make a totally new type of sound. I'm very sure that machine learning can produce even weirder sounds that are totally different from anything we've heard so far. And
Right.
So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw a lot of that with like OpenAI Jukebox a while ago, but other tools like that, I think I find so fascinating as somebody who likes to dabble with some music stuff, music production stuff. I think it's really interesting for like creators to be able to, if we can get these tools in the hands of creators, because I mean they're kind of useless if they're just stuck in a research lab. But if we're making these tools available so people can use them in their digital audio workstations, that would be so cool.
And there's like in terms of audio, there's like this weird artifact that I've had a few conversations with other people. It's like, for some weird reason, it seems to be the case that like modeling audio is actually more difficult than images. And one of the like potential explanations is that our brains are kind of like if you produce an image where some of the pixels are off, that's actually fine. Like we either see it as like there's a little bit of noise, or it might even have like an artistic effect. Like it's actually something that we like. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you have some like mistakes in the waveform of audio, it just sounds bad. So it feels like our brains are much less like, we're much more sensitive to mistakes in audio waveform. So it feels like, there's still like some gap between like audio that sounds really clear and really good versus what we can generate now. But I think that gap's gonna fade really, really quickly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, I think we're a lot more sensitive to it. I think, we want things to sound punchy. We want things to sound clear with audio, and that's significantly harder to, that's like trying to get an HD image generated. It's very, it's difficult. Yeah. Now, speaking of audio, one like really incredible thing that you've built is this wzrd.ai. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. wzrd.ai, which is basically a platform which lets you upload some audio, and your site will produce, an AI generated music video for it.
Yeah.
So can you talk about maybe a little bit of the research that went into creating this and maybe what sort of the model is behind the scenes?
Yeah, so this is actually like, the result of like one of my first few experiments with like digital art and generative models. Is like, actually the entire Wizard platform is based on StyleGAN. It's like this generative model from NVIDIA. Because I very clearly remember that when StyleGAN was released, it was like the first time that neural networks were able to generate like high definition images. And I was like, wow, this is like a total game changer. But like the paper was mainly focusing on these data sets like faces, for example. We all know this website, thispersondoesnotexist.com. And so I saw a lot of media attention for StyleGAN that was kind of focusing on the negative aspect. Hey, you can generate fake faces, and this could be used for all kinds of nefarious purposes. But I immediately thought, like, you could create amazing artistic content with this as well. So the first thing I started doing is I started training StyleGAN on like data sets of images that were purely aesthetic, like images that looked amazing in terms of colors and composition. And so I started training a few of my own StyleGAN models. I got some interesting like images and interpolations. But then I was like, like all these interpolations, they're kind of like just random, smooth videos, and there's not really a lot of narrative in there. And so I thought, how could we make this a little bit more interesting? And then I just thought about, hey, why don't we like take audio, music, and I built a little Python script to do like feature extraction. So I do like harmonic percussive decomposition, and you basically get like these nice features that contain like the rhythm of the song and a little bit of the melody. And then I started using those features to basically drive the interpolation through the latent space. So maybe when there's a beat, you suddenly push the latents forward, or when something's happening in the melody, you change the latents. And so I started playing around with this, and I posted some videos on Twitter. One of them went really viral. And so I was like, hey, people actually like this kind of content. And maybe there might be other people that would like to make their own content using these tools. And so I decided to basically turn all of my Python code into like a website, like a media platform, where people can now just like, they can select a visual theme, which is basically a pre-trained StyleGAN model that was trained on a specific data set. Then you can upload your own audio track. It will run like the whole audio analysis pipeline. And then you can even, you get like a timeline, so you can place certain images on the timeline. So you have some control over the visual narrative. And then you can render the final video, and you get like this audio reactive texture. And I think one of the most interesting things is when you don't take the output of Wizard as like the final result, but you then use this audio reactive texture in, secondary and even tertiary software tools. Yeah.
Right. Making it as like an extension to your creative ability, like we were discussing. Yeah. And hopefully I'll be able to include a clip here. Somewhere. It's super interesting. So what are your plans for the future with this platform? Do you have any plans here, or is this kind of like a one-off project?
So I mean, to be honest, like the whole space of generative digital media is moving so quickly that it's kind of hard for me to figure out like, what do I actually want to work on next? Like, I told you I'm also working on like protein design. I'm doing a bunch of digital art, and so I don't actually have like a very solid plan. Other than I'm really sure that I want to keep doing stuff within this space. It's just a matter of like, which tool do I want to build on? Like I'm working on this Abraham project, Beam, I have Wizard. There's also all this new stuff with like the fusion models and Valley now. So it's like, there's just this total jungle of possibilities and it feels a little bit hard to pick one thing and work on it consistently.
Right. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming for sure.
I know that we're close to being on time. So I think a couple personal questions, maybe, when you're not being obsessed with reading research papers and things like that, what do you like to do for fun?
Yeah, so I mean, I really like to balance my digital life with like a physical existence as well. So I'm actually like a really passionate rock climber. Like I picked up rock climbing like a couple of years ago, And it's really been my antidote to like when I spend too much time in front of a screen. I really enjoy like going out into the mountains and doing some rock climbing.
Oh, you actually do? You actually go out into the mountains?
Yeah. So I mean, here in Belgium is pretty flat. We don't have a lot of mountains. But when we go on vacation, we go to Spain or to Italy, and there's plenty of mountains, plenty of rock, and then
Oh, very awesome. And I guess finally, since you're Belgian, what's your favorite Belgian beer?
Ooh, we have so many. I don't think I could pick a single one. Like there's a cafe not far from where I live, and the menu literally has like 2,000 beers. And I don't think I've even tasted all of them. But if I had to pick one, I'd say Omer is probably one of my favorites. I don't even think it's that famous outside of Belgium. We just have a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe next time I visit, I'll have to go try one.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Excellent. Well, Xander, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me today. This was really fun.
No problem. It's wonderful.
Awesome. Okay.